The purpose of this paper is to look at what mechanisms we can use to address and reduce climate changing greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Agriculture as a sector contributes to around 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Some of those impacts are direct impacts through the process of agricultural production and the emission of nitrous oxide and methane, and some of those impacts are to do with land use change for agricultural production. That's the cutting down of forests and the clearing of land for agriculture. So we haven't really done anything to date about the concern. We've tended to focus on the built environment and the transport sectors. The audience for this paper is the policy community. We're talking about policymakers within government, but also opinion formers and decision makers within the food industry and the non-governmental community. The research was undertaken through a process of desk-based analysis, so it looked at the academic literature and grey literature produced by non-governmental organisations and other stakeholders in the food system. Broadly speaking, there are four main mechanisms through which one might try and address greenhouse gas emissions. The first is perhaps the one that everybody thinks of when they think about governance, which is regulation. So we're talking here about laws, directives, standards, specifications, that sort of thing. But then the second way of influencing emissions is through economic incentives and disincentives. Incentives for doing things, for example, for practicing agriculture in a particular kind of way or eating in a particular kind of way, and disincentives. So that could be taxes or other forms of pricing mechanisms. That's the second mechanism. The third is what we might call softer measures, cooperative agreements among industry, members of industry. So it could be retailers or it could be agricultural producers getting together and agreeing on developing a vision or a roadmap or a way forward for practicing agriculture and reducing emissions. And finally, the fourth mechanism is really the softest of them all, which is information. So consumer-facing information to farmers to raise awareness of the problem and of the choices that people have. The report's key conclusions are that agriculture is, firstly, an incredibly complex set of activities practiced by millions of farmers worldwide. Agriculture is not just about producing food, it's about livelihoods of millions of people, some of whom are very, very poor, and that measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if those negatively affect the livelihoods of poor farmers, they will not be sustainable. The second point is that there has been virtually nothing that focuses specifically on greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. And when we're talking about food consumption habits and governance that seeks to influence consumer demand, there is even less. So clearly this is an area that policymakers need to look at more. There isn't a silver bullet, and I think that comes up again and again when we're talking about climate change. There is no one mechanism or measure that's going to do the job. We certainly need regulations, we need global caps on emissions, and we need some kind of cap on food related impacts. And within that, economic measures can play a very important part. Cooperative agreements within the food industry are also important, but certainly not sufficient in themselves. There has been, to date, more of a focus on these softer measures than there has been on the harder regulatory and economic instruments. And I think given the urgency of the problem, that needs to change. Cooperation within the industry provides an enabling environment, but it won't do the job on its own. And the same very much applies in the case of information provision.